Welcome to Higher Learning. I am your host, Oz Rashid. This is more than just a podcast. It's a front row seat to how elite leaders build the most iconic of teams. The kind of leaders who spot potential that others overlook, who build cultures people don't want to leave, who set the bar, then raise it. Work and how we work is evolving at a rapid pace like no time in history. Our guests will give you insights on how to stay out in front when it comes to all things talent, leadership, management, artificial intelligence, and developing the skills that actually matter. Whether you're a founder, hiring manager, or just obsessed with building teams the right way, this is your spot. If it's your first time here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button, drop a rating, tell a friend who gets it. To our longtime listeners, we appreciate you. Thanks for the continued support. Now, let's get into it. All right, everybody. Today's guest is Malvika Jhangiani, a global HR leader who sits at the intersection of people, performance, and transformation. With a career built inside complex multinational organizations, Malvika has led change at scale, helping teams grow, cultures evolve, and businesses perform in environments where alignment is anything but simple. Today, she's doing work at FARO, where people strategy plays a critical role in driving global impact. In this conversation, we dig into how Malvika first found her way into HR, what pulled her towards FARO in the first place, and we talk about some of the biggest organizational transformations she's been a part of, as well as her personal methodology for driving change that actually sticks. We're also going to explore where global organizations tend to struggle most when it comes to inclusion and productivity, something I know a lot of our listeners struggle with. Finally, we'll talk about mentorship, why developing talent matters so much to her, whether she prefers the formal and informal approaches, and the mentors who have shaped her journey along the way. Let's get into it. Malvika, how are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having me, Oz.
Of course. I'm so happy that you're on the show. Now, you told me recently that you just got back from Vietnam. Was that a personal trip? Was that a business trip? Talk us through that trip.
It was a personal trip. Every December, we try and pick a place where we can go back and just unplug and recharge. And this time, the dot on the map landed in Vietnam. It was gorgeous. Highly recommend. The cities are bustling. The food is incredible. And the little towns are almost stuck in time. So we had a beautiful time. Everything from making lanterns to kind of drinking snake wine. It was
Snake
it was
wine.
a fun trip.
That sounds amazing. All right, I got to ask you something. And I was talking with one of my close contacts at a dinner a few months ago. She mentioned to me she had went to Vietnam, and I might get this wrong, but I think she said in South Vietnam, there is a certain excitement and acceptance of Americans, right? And then North, it might be a little bit different. So if you travel up and down the country, it might be a very different, expectation or format. Did you experience that all, or were you in one area or the other?
I think by and large across Vietnam, we found everyone to be so accepting of Americans, so resilient. They said, they were just so welcoming and
I love that. Did you have any banh mi or pho?
yes. We had pho at the place Anthony Bourdain recommended
Ooh, I
to
love that.
test whether it was the best kind of banh mi. And we had incredible pho. Now we need to try it out here in Atlanta and see if it meets up to our standards. I think we've been spoiled with the authentic Vietnamese food that we tried.
It might be tough to go back to going to a food truck or any of these Vietnamese places that pop up here in the U.S., although there are some good ones out there. I love that you went to the same place that Anthony Bourdain did. I have a friend who goes and travels to all the different diners, dives-ins, and drives with Guy Fieri, which, listen, I like that. I can get down on that. But it just sounds so much more interesting going and following the places that Anthony Bourdain has gone and all the little outlet. He seems to have found incredible little outlets and places to be able to eat. So I love that. Sounds like you had a great trip and great experience then.
Incredible. It was incredible.
I love that about you. So let's talk about it, because we talked a little bit about global organizations and transformation in our opening. And you're obviously in the HR space and the talent space. So I love to start here because I love to understand people's journeys. Was HR something that you knew you wanted to do from a very early age, or was it something that you fell into? Walk us through how you got into HR in the first place.
So I did my bachelor's in accounting, right? And loved the numbers, but quickly realized that the magic happens with people. So it was between advertising and HR. Those were my two kind of options that I was toggling between. And then as I thought about it, people was just kind of sits at the center of everything, every aspect of business. So joined college in to do my master's in HR. I still remember my first year on campus. The dean asked us, "So why had you picked this HR program?" And we all said, "We love people." Um, and now, 25 plus years later, you realize HR is people, it's process, it's strategy, it's kind of the marriage of all of that together. But yes, studied in HR, did HR consulting, and then slowly moved to the dark side as an HR business partner.
Oh, wow. I love that. A quick aside right here. I think back to, so I've got a 14-year-old, a 12-year-old, and an 11-year-old daughters right now that are in different levels of thinking about what they would want to do beyond high school and for university. And I think back to my own experience and just how unprepared I was to select a major and follow that major down a path and understood what that major entailed when it came to actual work. And it's just, I hear your story about accounting and I hear this all the time of how we're at this very formative age, 18, sometimes 17 years old, having to make these life decisions that put us into these lanes from a career perspective. And I give you so much credit for realizing, you know what, actually, I want to go in a different direction. Because what ends up happening is, well, I got the degree. So now I got to go get the job. And then you look back 10 to 15 years later and you realize, oh my gosh, like this is not the path that I wanted to go down. I just think it's an incredible bad setup. And we do a disservice to a lot of our youth by trying to put people into these functions, these areas, these disciplines without giving them insight and exposure, right, to all the different ones that exist out there. So that to me is something that I think we can all be doing better at, and it's something I think about when I inform and talk to my daughters. And then I'm also interested, do you find the accounting aspect ever comes into your work nowadays? So tell me a little bit.
It does. It does. My CFO teases me. He's like, "Oh my gosh, like I can hire you at some point because as we design comp plans, as we look at incentive plans, as you look at just financials, right? As an HR professional, I say the first hat I wear is the business hat, and the second hat I wear is kind of the HR hat. So just understanding the language of business and the balance sheet is so important. So yes, I do use that accounting degree
I got to
pretty
imagine the
often.
CFOs must love seeing your resume and go, oh, this is somebody that's going to speak my language. And it's always very, very important for HR leaders to be able to understand the business. And there's nothing more business than the financials and the bottom line. So I love that. I think that's amazing. Let's talk about your current company, FARO. So tell us a little bit about it. And I want to know what drew you to the company in the first place.
So FARO is a small cap tech company involved in 3D imaging and scanning software as well as hardware solutions. Our solutions are used for building spacecraft, to building cars, to construction, as well as for crime scenes, right? So instead of, for example, to build a car, the cool cars we have nowadays have all of these curves. Instead of engineers looking at at the drawing and testing the parts, they can just put a FARO scanner and it'll say if the car is built as per the specifications. You can use it to scan a university campus. So what attracted me to FARO was the technology, right? We're in 3D imaging, scanning, 3D reality, which is a world of today and tomorrow. Global company across 28 countries. And the global piece was really exciting for me because all my career I've worked with Asia, Europe, US. I've actually worked across 3 countries, India, US, and the Middle East. So the global piece was exciting. And the third piece that attracted me to FARO was we had a humble but hungry leadership team led by this brilliant CEO. And he was pulling together kind of the dream team. The organization was going through transformation. And I was really excited by the opportunity of taking the organization from point A to point N, right? So it's been a really neat experience for me.
I want to dig a little bit deeper there. I'm not going to say double click because that would be too on the nose, but let's talk about the fact that you spent your career at companies like Monsanto, right, which is really big in the food CP space, right? Newell Brands, which is, like appliances and Tupperware and things like that, right? And then was it like, were you seeking out technology? Because you mentioned that the technology is at the forefront of everything and it's such a part of everything we do. The technology at FARO sounds absolutely amazing. I'm just interested, like, was that something that you were specifically intent in getting involved in this industry, or was it just the right opportunity, right people, right company?
For me, so when I'm sure you've taken your strengths finder, right? So when I do my strengths finder, one of my top 5 strengths is learner. So FARO was the first B2B business I had worked in. Most of the other businesses I've worked in are B2C. Um, but just the opportunity, it's a public company, CHRO, global. I got a really good vibe from the leadership team, the board. Um, and I just, I am all my career, I have indexed on one thing, which is when a new opportunity comes, whether it's a stint in a company or a project, say yes, you know. Um, and you'll never go wrong if you say yes, versus often we tend to have the self-doubt and say, oh, I have done just 5 out of the 10 things on this list, so I'm not ready right now. I have never kind of reflected back and said, oh, I should have said, I regretted saying yes. So I'm always, they called, I met them, I liked them, and I was like, okay, let's jump in and let's get rolling.
Love that. I love that. So let's talk transformation. So transformation is kind of this buzzy word that can just mean a lot of different things, like change in an organization. All organizations go through some level of change, obviously, but transformation has a more kind of specific, whether it be a product transformation or an organizational transformation from a cultural perspective or a philosophy perspective. This is something that you've really kind of made the centerpiece of your career as an HR leader. I'm interested. Can you tell us about how you're defining organizational transformation and what's one of the most biggest successful ones that you've been a part of throughout your storied career?
As I reflect on my career, like that is the one kind of hallmark of most of the roles I've been in. At Newell Brands, it was about kind of transforming Sharpie from a sales-led brand to a brand-led brand, bringing together the baby and the writing business. But I would say the biggest transformation and the birth of my kind of love for transformation happened in Monsanto. So just to give you a little bit of color, we had acquired in Monsanto, we'd gone through this period of intense growth. We'd acquired 16 different companies and we hadn't integrated them. And so my role was to kind of integrate these businesses. I was head of HR for the sales organization. And at that point of time, we quickly realized that we needed to get synergies and integrate these roles. So I worked with my business lead as well as his leadership team on this top secret project. We called it Project Panther because it was all about stealth. And as we kind of reviewed our business, we realized 65% of our sales went through 6 strategic accounts. And that was the holy cow. We'd never touched these accounts. So if I take an analogy, it was kind of like to the same account, to the same Walmart, for example, one of our people was selling wipers, one was selling tires, one was selling the car, one was selling the door. And the accounts were asking, no, I just need one mega account manager. So worked with the leadership team to define what's our structure, how does this account want us to partner with them? Are we true partners? Are we just service providers? Redesigned that whole business. Worked on communication and messaging, not just to employees who were impacted by the change, but to customers to say, hey, why are we making this change? And then the other huge kind of initiative we did was as we looked at feet on the ground, right? We had sales reps in all these companies who cannibalizing each other's sales instead of growing the pie. So a lot of work on using metrics to decide where do we need boots on the ground, who's the right person in the job, how do we restructure the sales organization. And in agriculture, you sell once a year. So if you make a mistake in timing your transformation, you've lost sales for the entire year. So very strategic about the timing of this change, thinking through the leadership with the leadership team. What's the right structure? What are the right people to go into the structure? What's the messaging? How do we execute it? How do we drive incentives to grow the pie? And that was really pivotal because we implemented this huge change and actually grew sales while reducing headcount and also increased customer satisfaction, our NPS scores, and customer intimacy through the change.
So I love that. A couple of things come to mind. So number one, I want to put a pin on the fact that you were the HR leader specifically in sales, because sales is a different animal and beast. And I know a lot of people that listen to this podcast are constantly trying to find out, how can I find those sales unicorns? Because how they interview and how they a lot of times perform can be very different things. So I want to come back to that when we start talking hiring. But I'm interested, you made a comment just now about the increased revenue, the increased NPS scores from the customers. How during the journey did you know you were on the right track though, right? When you don't have those specific measurables at an indefinite point in time in the future, how do you know that you're tracking the right way? Is it within your stakeholders? Is it you have to kind of wait and see? You never really know. Like, how did you kind of measure that success in real time?
I think it starts with engaging the right stakeholders. You need the right cooks in the kitchen, not too many, because otherwise, during transformation, you have a leak and it's the worst kept secret, right? Which also causes anxiety, and you'll have attrition and all the other things that go along with it. So, getting the right stakeholders in the room to methodically work through the process. The other thing I've found that's beneficial is think about the risks as well as the opportunities. So, as you're working through a change, let's map out best case scenario. Here's what happens. Here's the opportunity we capture. Worst case scenario, what could go wrong? And then let's have a contingency plan to address that risk. And by working through that and by clearly defining, here's what success looks like, right? Success is we grow sales or we reduce headcount or we reduce costs by X. Once you put it on paper, then assessing success versus that becomes easier.
That makes total sense. I want to talk a little bit because you've worked in such global organizations, and my company, we have offices, 8 offices, 3 of them are outside of North America. Um, and so one of the things that, like, I went on a trip to our India office a few months ago, and it kind of reminded me about understanding how to include and to be empathize and understand that the way they take in meetings, the things that they have to deal with are very different than what we might be dealing with in our US offices. And so I'm always kind of fascinated about how organizations that handle this kind of inclusion and this idea of productivity on a global scale, because it's one thing. It's hard enough to kind of duplicate culture and systems, office to office in one country, let alone when you start to take into advance different time zones, different languages, different cultural nuances, right? So I'm just interested, what have you seen in your career that works in terms of kind of creating this more inclusive and productive environment across a geographically dispersed workforce?
Honestly, with global companies, creating just listening is so important, right? It starts with listening and being aware and having that cross cultural awareness of what works in one culture may not translate well in another culture. So it starts by ensuring we're listening, we're having everyone have a voice on the table. Sometimes you would find like Asia is very respectful, so they will not necessarily dissent as easily. And again, within Asia, there are nuances, right? Um, India, for example, were ruled by the British, so they are far more direct than the Thai. So it's understanding that we cannot use a vanilla approach for everything, and there has to be that listening, that understanding, that two-way dialogue. And as companies, I think global companies often struggle with what is global and what is local. So, for example, when we were with Newell, we were very clear that the Sharpie global brand strategy is global, right? What the brand stands for, its colors, its positioning is global. However, Asia for the Lunar New Year could have a promotion pack or different advertising to drive their peak season, which is different from the US back to school season. So it's just identifying, getting that sweet mix of what is local in a sense, right? What's global and what's local, and how do we smush the both to get to that fine line that works?
I love that. I mean, what I heard from you there is listening and taking in information from all the different stakeholders across the globe and trying to build a program that ultimately has a bedrock of foundational values, but on top of that allows for nuance and difference based on cultural differences and the way that people operate and what works in certain cultures and what doesn't. So I think that's really, really good advice. And I think there's probably some people who are taking their Sharpie right now and writing down some notes based on everything you said. Let's talk about mentorship, because it sounds like that's something that's really impacted you in your career, both being a mentor and having people mentor you. Um, is this like formal or informal for you? Like, are you looking at like formal mentorship programs in these organizations, or is this, you know what, I can see myself in this person, or I can see that this person needs help. I'm going to reach out to them, take them to lunch and do it. Like, how have you seen that in your career play out? Do you feel more comfortable one way or the other?
It's a bit of both. I have been really fortunate throughout my career to have to have been part of formal mentorship programs, as well as have been adopted by mentors who become sponsors. And so one of my big leadership philosophies is to place big bets. You know, someone placed a big bet on me when I moved functions, when I moved from compensation to HR business partner, or when I kind of moved to the US and placed a big bet that, yes, she understands HR, she can do it here. And so I am super cognizant of paying it forward, right? So just last night, I was having dinner with someone I continue to mentor, and her husband, and she reported it into me 2 jobs ago, and we've still kept in touch. So I'm super focused on spending time to mentor people, but also I have mentors who are still on my speed dial, and as I navigate my career, I will call them and say, "Hey, here's something I'm working through. You know me. Should I take this leap of faith, or do I hold back?" And they're great sounding boards for me.
Well, we're big on celebrating and shouting out. So I want you to pick one mentor out right now. Who's somebody that's made a big impact on your career?
Lisa Massa.
Okay.
Lisa
Where did you
Massa.
work with
Shout
Lisa
out to
and why?
Lisa. Lisa has been an incredible role model to me in terms of just helping me navigate my career as I came back after having my baby, and just being a role model for me on how you balance, family and work, as well as I navigated my career in Monsanto. She placed some big bets on me and placed me in roles which were a little scary, but I always had her safety net. So her and Karen Wishart, I give two. I picked
Two
two.
shout. You get two. That's two. We don't want to leave anybody out. I love that. We're going to give them a shout out. We'll make sure that when we post this later, we give them a little bit of love. I love to see that. I love that you're paying that forward to other people. And I think if we had more of that, sometimes like your career, you feel very alone. You feel like you have to figure things out on your own. There's not really a good, reliable third party a lot of the time that you can go to get advice, unless you're turning to ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini at this point. And I don't even know that I would do that. It's really big to have mentors, and more importantly, sponsors, right? Mentors are awesome. But if you have somebody that is on your behalf in a room at a company you work at when you're not in there fighting for you, man, that's a powerful thing. That's a very, very powerful thing. All right.
Absolutely.
We got to talk about one of our favorite subjects. We're going to talk about bond meat. No, I'm kidding. We're going to talk about hiring. We're going to talk about how important hiring is. And I want to learn a little bit more about your approach. So let's start here, whether it be for your own team or whether it be how you advise your organizations. What's a core hiring philosophy that you hold to?
My core hiring philosophy is hire for will, not skill. Skill can be taught. Skill can be learned, but you need employees and candidates who are willing to step up to that challenge, who are willing to learn, who are willing to kind of try and fail. So I will always hire for will and not skill.
Finding the right talent for your team doesn't have to be a struggle. Meet Aon Hire, the world's first hiring experience management platform designed to transform the way you hire. Powered by AI, Aon Hire takes the hassle out of every step in the process. From smart resume analysis to customized interview questions, it saves you time, money, and effort. Plus, with real-time insights from every interview, you can quickly identify top candidates, reduce turnover, and stay on budget. And forget about note-taking, Aon Hire takes care of that for you. Ready to revolutionize your hiring process? Visit aonhire.com and get started today.
Ooh, I love that. What about a memorable interview moment? If I ask about that, maybe you could have been interviewing somebody or they were interviewing you. It could be a bad, could be good. You don't got to name names, but I'm just interested. What's a memorable interview experience that you have?
Gosh, so many to name. I would say the worst I have seen
Ooh,
when I have been interviewed
spill the tea.
was this one organization that started from kindergarten. It was like a 5-hour interview process, and they started from Malvika in kindergarten to Malvika now. And I remember wrapping it up after 5 hours thinking, and I told my husband this, I said, gosh, at this point, they know more about me than you knew when you married me. So just the intense stress interview is an example of, kind of
Let's
the
shout that
worst.
out. How did that make you feel? Because it doesn't sound like it left a positive impression on you. And some company thinks they're being super diligent by doing this. What was the impression it left on you as a candidate?
Yeah, it wasn't their fault. They were just going through, one of these kind of old school, hi, we start, what's your favorite subject in kindergarten? Now let's move to elementary school. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is interesting. So initially, as a candidate, you go through it saying, I'll go through it, but eventually you're exhausted. One of the quintessential mistakes I see organizations as well as interviewers do is, you have an hour-long interview. You spend 50 minutes interviewing the candidate. And then at the last 10 minutes, you're like, what questions do you have? And it should be a dialogue versus an interview. I keep saying a job search is like dating. Both sides have to find that right match and fit. So going through that, coming back to that interview, at the end of it, I just felt A, exhausted, B, just unsure whether it was culturally the right fit for me. Because I thrive in collaborative cultures, not one of those grill.
Yeah. It's just like on it, you have to, anything they said, like if somebody shows up late or if they cuss or anything like that, like in an interview or a date, you have no choice but to kind of extrapolate that based on that short set of information you have, even if that's something that's not very common to them. So you sitting in that interview, you had to look at that culturally and say, this isn't a very collaborative organization. And listen, here's what I'll say. You want to know for this company, if they're listening, you want to know what everybody's favorite subject in kindergarten is. It's either nap or recess. Okay. I don't want to hear that, we've got some sort of prodigy that has some, okay, it's nap or recess. That's always the answer in kindergarten. And I love that you said that. And one of the things is I know somebody that believes in really it's a 50-50 situation, right? They set up their interview process for as much as the information as the candidate needs to understand, as the employer needs to understand, because it's both sides needing to feel good about what they're going into. And by the way, when you make a mistake as a company, man, I warn against that. I try to help companies with that. But you know what? That's a little more fixable than when you make a mistake as a candidate, which can be sometimes intractable and really, really detrimental. So I think that's great advice on your part. Do you have a favorite question that you like to ask?
Oh, yes, I have two questions, which I ask in all my interviews. Spoiler alert for anyone who's ever going to
I mean,
interview
if
with
they're
me.
smart enough to listen to this podcast before they interview with you, kudos to them. They should get an advantage. That's the way I look at it.
Totally. So one, I ask, what have you learned recently?
Mhm.
Right? And it can be knitting. It can be like, it doesn't have to be a work-related thing. But it could be something fun. And often when the person says something personal, that's better. But it gives me an insight into their learning agility. How curious are they? Are they taking the time to do something outside of work? Are they kind of learning all the time? So that's one. And the second question I like to ask is, If I asked your peers to talk about you, what would they say? Because often I find employees tend to over index on, I need to keep my boss happy or I need to keep my team happy. Very few focus on the peers. Whereas realistically in corporate life, when a role opens up, especially internally in an organization, often it is your peer feedback that is the most important. How collaborative are you with them? How are you able to influence them? How are you able to push back? Um, so I ask, you know, talk to me about what your peers would say about you in other functions and in your function.
That's
And I think
gold.
that gives me
That's
great
gold.
insight.
So much knowledge per minute in this podcast right now. That's amazing. I love that. I want to go back to the sales question that I asked you a minute ago. I I, I deal with this a lot because we built software that helps kind of basically it's interview management software that has AI act as a hiring expert for you. And so I see a lot of people struggle with like account executive roles and sales roles because here's the deal. In interview, you get a good salesperson in there, they're going to crush it, right? But it doesn't always mean that's what they're going to deliver on, right? When they're in the job. What advice would you give for anybody that, small company, startup, big, small, medium business, struggling hiring salespeople?
Yeah, I find salespeople are often the best at selling products as well as themselves. So there will definitely be the sizzle. What you need to dig a little deeper is there the substance behind the sizzle? So I ask questions on, tell me about a time when you lost a sale. Like tell me about a failure. Tell me about a time when you couldn't close a sale. Um, or tell me about a price increase that you weren't supportive of, because often they'll push back on doing price increases. And how did you navigate that? Because the best salesperson is able to do that value selling, is able to handle that tough objection, is able to convert that negative customer to a positive customer. So I really take kind of that poor experience, that poor NPS score, and dig a little deeper to see if the salesperson, how he or she navigate through that, and do they have the substance beyond the sizzle?
I love that. That's really good advice. Last question from a hiring perspective. We all miss. So maybe this is something that you've learned from or evolved on, but when you've missed in the past on people that you've hired, can you go back to a theme or something that you had to learn before you ultimately started getting it right more often than not?
I think earlier in my career, right, as I reflect back, there were a couple of misses, and um, it was, as I reflect back, it was about setting expectations and calibrating expectations with a candidate. Sometimes you're selling a role saying, this is super strategic. It's really a leadership role. And then when the candidate came in, they realized it was a bit of a player coach. It involved rolling up their sleeves. It involved being a doer as well as a leader. And so now as I approach interviews, I am way more candid and way more transparent to ensure that the employee is not just seeing kind of a sexy screensaver, but they're also seeing what the real program is once they come in, so they know what they're getting.
Love that. So my question for you is there a way that either personally or professionally you're leveraging AI that may be unique or something that's really helped you or enhanced you or anything you want to bring up about the topic altogether?
Oh, yes. But totally leveraging AI, I call it my new coworker, right? Doesn't dress as well as I do, but is inevitable. So use a lot of ChatGPT, Gemini. And personally, I use it for, to take minutes in meetings, to summarize notes, to help me word craft, certain policies, procedures. We use it, organizationally, sometimes to refine job description, to help with level 1 queries from employees. Hi, what's this policy? Instead of a person responding to it, I think technology has come such a long way that it can actually free up time for our function to actually do some of that strategic, creative work.
I love that. That's amazing. And you're using it as a co-pilot or augmenting what you're doing and making yourself more productive. How aggressive has the company been around implementing it into workflows or is HR being kind of a leader in that space of the organization?
We're using it in the sense of technology that, we use it in work. For example, we're on Workday. So where Workday has it or Skillsoft has it, we leverage it in that sense. We're currently experimenting with Copilot and leveraging it for, building presentations, crafting notes, summarizing leaks, etc. We do have a huge population of our employees in Europe, in full transparency, and they are more cautious with AI. I think 5-10 years later, we'll learn more whether that approach is better or the US approach of let's embrace it full steam ahead will work. So we're just a little bit cautious with our kind of European operations on how we integrate.
Historically, with technology, and maybe AI is a different animal altogether. We'll see. But historically, those that have pushed back and tried to be regressive in it and said, let's get policy right and let's get all these things right, those have typically been the societies that in some ways have been left behind. At the same time, like breakneck speed and doing things like that's not always a good thing either. My personal take on this is that I do think that a country should be pushing forward and investing and trying to be, a global player on this stage, especially if you're a US or a China or one of these India, one of these big, huge economies. And my belief is that adoption and usage and what the technology can do versus what it is doing, right, on with the everyday person, right, in everyday work, that always happens kind of gradually and then suddenly. It's always a bit slower. So I think there's some natural human behaviors that allow for this not to happen exactly as fast as maybe some of the technology leaders at Claude and OpenAI would want it to be, or what they profess is happening and coming. I always have to remember, because I'm so deep into the technology and I'm following things on X and I'm reading all these different publications, that this is a very small minority of people that rather than what exists in the world. And quite frankly, you have to bring almost, the majority of people with you to have real change and real impact and things like that. We know the advent of ChatGPT was a big step in that direction, but there's more of those to come. And so, far be it from me to speak on European policy, American policy. Everybody's doing what they think is best for their country, for their continent. I totally get it. But I do think that there's some natural disablers that allow for these things to happen in a way more incrementally than we would think. And so to that end, it does make sense to push forward and try to be out in front. So we'll see. We'll like you said, in 5 to 10 years, we'll figure out what's right there. All right, totally different topic. Let's talk about books. I love to read. Is there a book you read either previously or recently that you'd like to recommend for our listeners?
Well, I am currently reading 1929 by Andrew Sorkin, and that is about the 1929 financial crisis.
October 29th is Black Friday, I think, which is also my birthday. So not in 1929. I'm not 98 years old, 97 years old, but go ahead.
So I'm not fully through, but I will tell you it's written like a novel. There are so many parallels to the world we're living in right now. And it's awesome. So highly recommend. I think 40% into the book and I am riveted. So highly recommend that.
History doesn't repeat itself, but it tends to rhyme. What can you tell me that you've read that is something that has made you think of, this kind of reminds me of my current situation?
Well, I think the part that resonated with me was, when you look at the stock market, you look at how there was all this manipulation going on, and the belief was the common person should just do their own homework and learn, and they didn't, right? It was the little person who didn't read the fine print, didn't know all the nuances. And so the parallel I would say now is, we tend to get caught up in all of this social media and getting all my information, without doing my homework to really understand, is this the right stock I'm picking, or is this the state of the world, or, So all of the fact checking that needs to happen, it needed to happen then and it needs to happen now.
Here's what I'll say to all my friends who are listening, who are day traders or fancy themselves, people who are making a ton of money on the stock market or not making a ton of money. At the end of the day, the stock market is a form of gambling because essentially you're investing in what you think the future price of an organization's share value is going to be, right? In the future, not today, in the future, right? And just like we all accept that when you walk into a casino and play blackjack, that the odds are stacked for the house to win, the same thing in the stock market. There's hedge funds, there's the private markets, there's these wealth managers, there's people that are doing this on a day-to-day basis, right? That they miss and they make mistakes, but the game is set up for those people to ultimately have success. And sure, there are individual stories of, people being smart about it and having an idea of what could happen and predicting. But by and large, there's also people that win at blackjack all the time. There are people that win at poker all the time too. But by and large, that's not the way it's set up. And so I wish people would understand that, yes, as much as you might have an edge or you might think you know something that others don't, it's still gambling at the end of the day because it's about predictive markets and it's about what something is going to be in the future, right? So I think that's an important thing for people to realize. And it sounds a lot like what you just said in 1929 is the case. And we're here in 2026 with thousands of more information. And it doesn't feel like we're all that much better. Maybe a little bit, but not all that much better. So love that. Great. 1929. I'm going to check that out. Last question, Malvika. What is advice you'd give your 20-year-old self that you didn't know then, but that you know now?
Take the detour, right? Like when I was 20, I was hungry, ambitious. Like, how do I get to the top the fastest route possible? And as I reflect back, my biggest career pivotal moments have been when I have taken the scenic route, right? When it's been the detour, when I took that assignment in the Middle East, when I took that career break, when I took that international assignment, when I did the lateral role, which was equal pay, and that gave me so much breadth of experience. So take the scenic route, smell the roses, you'll still get to the top. You'll be fine.
I love that. I love that. No, there is no career journey that is just 100% linear, right? It usually does have a winding path. And I love that you put the emphasis on that's not a bad thing. That's a great thing. And by the time you get to wherever you want to go, you're probably going to be in a better place for having taken those detours. So that's amazing stuff. We do have a lightning round. We are ready for it. You mentioned that you like to travel a lot at the beginning. So I'm going to ask you some questions centered around your travels. Are you ready? Okay. If you're telling somebody a place that they need to go vacation this upcoming summer, husband and wife, where would you tell them to go that you've been?
Japan.
What part and why?
I would say Hakone, which is a little itty bitty kind of city in between in Japan. And it is live in a ryokan, which is a Japanese inn, where the yukata eats the 8-course meal. And it's just culturally such an incredible country. So Japan.
Love that. You live in Atlanta, right? Favorite place to visit in the continental United States?
This is tough. New York City.
Okay.
The city that never sleeps.
Yep.
Love it.
Why? Just you love like the energy, the bustle, the access to everything?
I love Broadway. I'm a huge theater buff. I sit on the board of the Alliance Theater here in Atlanta because I do not get enough drama in HR. I need to seek it in my non-for-profit life.
Too funny.
But just love Broadway, so New York.
Because what's the best show you've ever seen?
Oh, so many to name. Probably Hamilton. I loved Hamilton.
Did you see it with Lin-Manuel Miranda early on?
No, I
I
didn't.
Yeah.
I missed that.
Yeah.
I missed that.
Incredible show. My kids love it. I know all the songs because they're playing it in the car all the time. So I've only seen it once, but I can actually go word for word for most of the songs on that. So amazing.
Totally.
Favorite airline?
Delta.
What do you like to do on the airplane?
Read.
Okay.
I love the point. I love it. We travel a lot. So I love the point when you're in an airplane, you've packed what you've packed. Now, if you've left something, it's okay. Open a good book. Like I'll read a book and just relax on the airplane.
Love that. All right.
My favorite time.
It's exactly the same thing I do too. I do exactly the same thing. I open a book, I read, I get a lot of my reading done then. Love that. Last question. Airport lounges, overrated or amazing?
Amazing.
Okay, why? Tell me
I
your
will say
situation. Like,
amazing.
what do you like about airport lounges? Because here's my thing. I love airport lounges, but it feels like every single time now I go to it, there's like a line and there's a wait list. And it's like, I hate to say it, they're supposed to be a little bit exclusive. And it feels like everybody and their dad now is in these lounges and I just can't get in. And that sucks because I really enjoy them. But tell me your experience.
Yeah, I like them because the food's pretty decent. It's normally better than the aircraft foods.
For sure.
And you can rest and, get caught up on work, life, relax, stretch your leg, and then get into the plane and then
I'm with you.
suffer through the journey.
I just wish it was more, a little bit less successful, I guess is the way I was. But you know what? Let's bring everybody in. Let's have them enjoy it. I get it. And here's what I'll say. You're right about the airplane food. It's usually bad unless it's my favorite airline, which is Emirates. I know you live in the Middle East, so I'm sure you've taken the Emirates flight a couple of times. Food is fantastic. Yes. They do a great job.
Agreed.
Malvika, I really appreciate you coming on. I really enjoyed the conversation. I think people are going to get a lot out of this. I know they're going to be taking notes with their Sharpie, like I mentioned earlier. Thanks so much. I want to continue the conversation. Thanks again for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.
All right. Talk to you soon.